Welcome back. We're going to do an overview of chapter 21, which is about budgeting. This is probably the easiest chapter there is in our textbook because it involves running a budget. And most of us do this for our personal reasons also. So it makes a lot of sense. So we're going to do an overview of chapter 21. Budgetings are really important, and I'm not going to talk about this whole stuff, but all government agencies, all entities, all have budgets. Nonprofits have budgets. Businesses don't normally have a budget, but often they do. In manufacturing, you have to budget. It's very, very crucial because you need to understand what your expenses are going to be and project your future. Now, keep in mind, a budget is nothing more than a projection of what you're going to spend, what you're going to make, and what profits you're going to make. But it's still something as a guide. It's still a guideline to follow by. So when involved in the steps of budgeting involve establishing a goal, what's my plan to get to that goal, and periodically stop and check along the way. Now, the first few slides here we're going to talk about are not as important as understanding how to do the budget, but you should understand the objectives of it. So here's it's breaking down into different, these are called managerial functions: planning, directing, and controlling. If you were doing a degree in management, which I have, you would learn all of these things. So planning is basically setting the goals up and figure out how can I get my employees motivated to get to that goal. Directing is basically what decisions am I going to make to help achieve my goals. And controlling is comparing, did I do what I said I was going to do in my goals? So this is just kind of objectives of budgeting. Here's a little sheet for you to take a look at. Okay, but think about this. Budgeting is like dieting. Yes, I know that's a four-letter word, diet. If you go on too strict of a diet, what's going to happen? You know that you're going to fail. If your diet is too loose, you're not going to achieve your goal of what pounds you want to lose. So budgeting is really very, very crucial, especially in a manufacturer or any business, because again, you set it too tight, you're not going to make it. You set it too loose, you're not going to do it, or it's going to be too easy. And so the key is you really have to get everybody involved in it. So here's a little cartoon for you with budgeting. Okay. So back to talking about human behavior. You have to get your employees involved. That means they have to feel like they have a sense of belonging and that they've inputted to the budget. When your boss would come to you and ask you for your goals for the department or what you plan on having, if you actually did them yourself, you have some accountability and you feel more responsible and you feel better about it. So remember, always get your employees involved in your budgeting process. Get their input, their feedback. Now, be careful because there's something called a budgetary slack. Now, I'm really good about this. I do this actually with my classes, that I pad it. Most managers actually pad their budget in case emergencies happen. So I often pad my weekly syllabus outline so that in the event that I'm sick and I have to take off a class, I am not going to fall behind. I still have enough room in there. So be careful not to put too much slack in there, or otherwise it's really going to keep you from actually achieving it. But make sure you trim your inefficiencies wherever you can. So let's get started with the budgeting system. So the budgeting system, it usually involves looking at the whole year for the company, but most companies budget per month, maybe for the quarter, sometimes for weeks. But when we look at a budget, we never just look at 1 month, and I'm going to use a month as an example. We never look at just 1 month. We're going to look at least 3 months at a time and go from there. There's something called a continuous budget. It's called a 12-month projection. So today's April 2nd. And if I'm looking at a continuous budget, I'd be looking from April of 2020 to March of 2021. But a continuous budget, what happens with that is as we get to the end of March and move into May, at the end of my budget, the next month will pop up. So I'll start to see April next year on my budget. So hopefully this makes sense. This is called a continuous budget. So we start at February this year, we're looking to January this year, but as soon as we get to the end, as soon as this month drops off, the next month at the end pops on. This is actually called a rolling budget. And this is the way most people do their budgets. Next, we're going to look at a static budget. There's two things called a static budget and a flexible budget. So a static budget basically means I only look at one activity level. I either use it for a quantity, I'm only making X amount of parts, or I use it for only making one type of thing. Static budgets have a disadvantage is they do not adjust for changes in activity levels. So a static budget will only look at quantity of 10,000 I'm making. It won't tell me if I choose to make 8,000, where will I be? Or if I choose to make 12,000. So here's an example of a static budget. It's only looking at the cost for making one activity. That's it. This is not the type of budget we normally use. We use something called a flex budget. So a flex budget allows for different activity levels so that I can see what would my cost be under this quantity, what would be my cost under this quantity, and so on. So here, I'm going to bypass this. This is the steps on how to do it. Let's just get right to the flex budget. Here's a flex budget. So I have 3 different levels. Notice that I'm going to be making different quantities. Here are my variable costs. Now my variable costs are a per unit. So if I'm making 8,000 pieces times $5, my direct labor cost is going to be 40,000. So whichever level, I'm going to take the $5 per unit times the quantity to get my variable cost. Fixed cost, notice they're all the same because it doesn't make a difference what level I'm at. My fixed cost will always be the same all the way across. So here I can look at 3 different levels of activity and say, wait, if I'm going to with level 3, here's what I can expect. Level 1, here's what I can expect. This is called a flex budget. It's more accurate and it's used more frequently because sometimes I set out to do one thing and another thing happens, which is what I talk about here. And here's just a little visual. This is a static budget and I can only compare to actual, but a flex I can compare. Okay, so this is the end of the introduction to budgeting. We're going to move to the next video, which is going to start with the master budget.